Good morning, and thank you for joining us today. I'm your host, historian Edna Friedberg. Extremist beliefs and violence, including anti-Semitism, which is hatred or prejudice against Jewish people, they are circulating in new and alarming ways. Hate groups target young people on college campuses and online in social media with racist and other radical views in an effort to mainstream these beliefs. But going after young people is not a new strategy. In the 1930s and 40s, the Nazis preyed on the young to spread and legitimize violent anti-Semitism in German society. I'm joined today by a special guest, Vidya Ramalingam, who will help us unpack what is happening and offer suggestions for how we can respond. Vidya is the CEO and founder of Moonshot, an organization that works to disrupt online recruitment efforts by violent extremist organizations and to put an end to violent extremism around the world. Welcome, Vidya.
Thanks, Edna.
Together, we'll also examine how today's hate groups are repackaging anti-Semitic conspiracy theories that were commonplace in Nazi Germany. Viewers, please send us your questions and comments, and we'll get to as many of them as we can in the course of the live program. We know from looking at Holocaust history that when hateful ideas go unchallenged, people may not even recognize the ways that they are being manipulated. And that's what happened to a German boy named Peter Becker. Peter's Nazi education began in 1935 when he was only 6 years old. Decades later, in this video clip, Peter reflects on his indoctrination and how he later came to struggle with the realization that he had believed in an ideology and a movement that were so destructive.
By the time that the war ended in 1945, when I was 15, I had become a Nazi without ever really being aware that I was one. That is, I didn't know how I had become one. I knew that I was one, because to me Hitler was the great man in Germany's life. I was 150% Nazi. That's how strongly I believed in the system and in what Hitler was doing. I had sort of imbibed it from morning till night. I had drunk it, I had eaten it. It was part of my life. It was not until the end of the war that I became confronted with what Nazi Germany had been and what it had done. It took me 2 years to accept that Germans had killed Jews, that Germans had committed atrocities. It took me much longer to come to terms with the rest of it. And I don't think I have come to terms with it yet.
Now, Vidya, although Peter's indoctrination happened more than 85 years ago, you've observed a similar process of radicalization firsthand, both in Europe and here in the US. Could you help us understand how former extremists who you have met describe their recruitment?
Sure, Edna. What Peter describes here is a process I've seen time and time again, whether in the stories of former neo-Nazis or the stories of former Islamist extremists, really across the spectrum. People are neither born as extremists, nor do they typically choose a point in their lives to become an extremist. It's usually a long-term process based on their life experiences, and it's almost always impacted by their immediate network and people who are close to them. If you're surrounded by these ideas as a child, it's very likely you will grow up believing with every fiber of your being, as Peter did, in those ideals. Today, many recruits to extremist movements are older than Peter, but still many may be young, and they may be susceptible to believing a whole range of extremist ideologies for many reasons. Extremists prey on vulnerabilities, and they specifically target people who are struggling with their identity, with feelings of self-worth, maybe with traumatic or violent experiences in their past, as well as loneliness and feelings of isolation.
And I know you and I share a commitment to precision and wanting to be very specific about what is common and what is not in common. Because although followers of extremist movements may share some kind of blind devotion, there are many significant ways that Nazis in Germany differ from modern day extremists. Would you please comment on that a little?
Yeah, absolutely. The Nazis were a fringe movement in the 1920s, and their ideology spread across society and obviously took over the entire German nation in the 1930s and 1940s when Hitler was the head of state. Their way of thinking became legal and became official government policy under the Nazi regime as they passed new anti-Semitic laws and policies. So it didn't take long before the anti-Semitic and racist ideologies became mainstreamed and became the norm. In the United States today, neo-Nazis, Islamist extremists, and other hate groups are still very much on the fringe today. While we have been witnessing some of their hateful beliefs and conspiracy theories seep more and more into society, thankfully, in most cases, they are not state policy or accepted by the majority. There is a danger that ideology being spread by those fringe movements could become more accepted and normalized. In the US, we've already seen it lead to violence. Basic principles of equality and human rights have become politicized. So this is a threat that we shouldn't underestimate.
And one of the common elements at the core of many extremist groups, and one that is directly tied to the mission of the Holocaust Museum, is anti-Semitism, the hatred of Jews. A few years ago, I had the opportunity to speak with a former extremist named Derek Black. Derek grew up in a family that was influential in leading the white supremacist movement here in America and also in spreading hate online. I spoke with Derek years after he had renounced the white supremacist movement. Let's listen to him explain in his own words how central anti-Semitism is to that ideology.
White nationalists talk about their hatred of Jews as much, if not more, than they talk about their belief in race and their desire for global segregation. There is almost no white nationalist movement without this fundamental idea that Jewish people in the world are actively engaged in a global conspiracy to embrace immigration. This belief that Jewish people hate, quote unquote, white people. It's always anti-Semitism that is at the center of this whole ideology.
I want to pause for a moment to welcome our viewers. Thank you for joining us from Skokie, Illinois, from Las Vegas, Nevada, from Vernon, New Jersey, and Norman, Oklahoma. Good morning to you. Now, until recently, most of the anti-Semitic violence in the United States has been coming from the extreme political right. But we're living in a moment where we are also seeing it very disturbingly being unleashed by the extreme left. Vidya, could you help us to understand why anti-Semitism has such an enduring appeal to people who otherwise would seem to have little or nothing in common?
Anti-Semitic narratives are simple. They reduce very complex problems in our world and our lives into black and white solutions, where there's a very clear villain, in this case, Jewish people, and very clear heroes. Some of the myths we see circulating include claims that the Jews control banks or the economy, that Jews control the media, and even conspiracy theories that assert the Jews control the world. Anti-Semitism is sometimes called the longest hatred because these are not new narratives. These narratives have been around for over 2,000 years.
And we have a comment from a viewer named Terry. Terry is kind of reflecting and asking, I really figure that young people in our country today would know better. Why is there so much hate? Would you care to respond?
Well, extremists and hate groups, they prey on feelings of fear and anxiety in society, and they also exploit moments of crisis. And in the US, over the last 3 to 4 years, we've been through so many crises as a nation. So this is a prime moment for groups like this to try and tear us apart and take advantage of the fact that there's high levels of anxiety.
So even if the particular moment in time offers fertile ground, many of these conspiracy theories, of course, are much older and long predate social media. I'm thinking in particular of a book called The Protocols of the Elders of Zion, a book which is more than a century old and that alleges that there is some kind of shadowy Jewish conspiracy to dominate the world. The Nazis in Germany adopted and republished this book, and even though over the decades it has been repeatedly proven to be a work of total fiction, as we're seeing on these covers here, the book continues to circulate today. The Protocols was even embedded in the founding charter of the terrorist group Hamas, which mentioned the book by name to supposedly justify its mission to destroy the state of Israel and to kill all Jews. And looking at the Protocols, it demonstrates how even totally absurd lies have the potential to become widely accepted as fact. Even though the methods of spreading hatred have changed, many of the elements remain consistently powerful. I'm going to pause again, this time to welcome our international viewers. Thank you for joining us from as far away as Frankfurt, Germany, Sintra, Portugal, Strasbourg, France, and Halifax, Canada. We are so glad that you are here. Now, looking back historically, the Nazis spread their anti-Semitic and racist ideology by focusing on young people. Nazi youth groups were pervasive and influential. By the late 1930s, kids in Germany were required to join the Hitler Youth for boys and the League of German Girls, and Hitler was consistently portrayed as a father figure. Peter Feigl was a young Jewish boy living in Vienna when Germany annexed Austria in March 1938. Let's listen to Peter, looking back as an adult, describe how he was drawn to the excitement that the Hitler Youth generated when he was a kid.
And I went down there and I saw these tens of thousands of people on the street, and all the German flags and the music and the bands and everything else. And I was in there with the mass of the people, shouting my head off like everybody else. Ein Volk, ein Reich, ein Führer. One people, one Reich, and one leader. When I finally got home, my mother was besides herself. She didn't know, where have you been? You've been gone for 6 hours, you know. And I said to her, I saw our Führer. Whereupon my mother slapped me left and right and said, you never call that SOB again our Führer. He is not our Führer. And I guess that's the first time that I came to the realization, wait a minute, somehow we don't fit into the grandiose schemes of this maniac. But as I said, at 9, I wanted to have a uniform like all the other kids who were joining the Hitlerjugend, you know, and have a little dagger and Sam Brown belt and march to the music and the drums. It all was fascinating and hypnotizing for a young kid.
To use today's vocabulary, the Nazis were really sophisticated marketers. They were not just peddling oversimplified hate message, but they also emphasized a sense of belonging and community, as Peter makes clear. How do hate groups appeal and connect with young people today?
Well, extremists directly reach out to and speak to young people. They use what I would call grooming tactics, where they build trust and build an emotional connection with young people. And then they take advantage of these emotional connections to push people to get involved in what is actually a destructive and violent community. The starting point might be that you watch a video online, you share a meme, you start engaging with some content, and then someone will reach out to you and start a one-to-one conversation. And almost always there is some element of personal outreach that's used to recruit people into extremist movements. I can't stress this enough. You don't get radicalized online simply by watching a video or reading a piece of content. It's almost always because they feel like they have a community, that feeling of belonging, whether it's real or imagined. It's because they feel like they're a part of something important and bigger than themselves that they join.
Let's bring this down to the personal level and one individual. Extremists found a way to engage with an American teenager named Lauren Manning, and we have a photo here of Lauren taken after she became a member of a white supremacist group. We recently spoke with Lauren. She no longer is part of white supremacy, but let's listen to her look back and describe how she was recruited.
I was 17 when I was recruited online. It was on this page that was dedicated to heavy metal. A year before that, my dad had actually passed away. I was close to him. So basically what I was looking for is some sense of structure, a father figure, some place to call my own. I got this message one day saying, I was just wondering if you are National Socialist or just listen to the music. I didn't want to sound stupid. I responded and I said, I just listen to the music. So we had chatted more from there. I was honestly just looking for a friend. I was pretty lonely at the time. And the way this group that he was involved in was presented to me was, hey, guess what? You can get all your emotional needs met right here. So it was one of those things where basically in hindsight, it was too good to be true, or it sounded too good to be true.
I think a lot of us can relate to how vulnerable you are when you feel lonely. And Lauren was young. She desperately wanted to be part of something. A viewer named Jerome has written in to say that the feeling of belonging, that it's so strong, even if it means belonging to pure evil. Vidya, many young people right now, in recent months and recent years, are passionately expressing hateful beliefs. While the psychology of each person is obviously different, why do you think we see so much of this among college students in particular?
College students are figuring out who they are, and often they're doing that in new environments far away from their families and their childhood friends. They may feel lonely. Many of them are eager to make new friends and to join new communities. And at the same time, these students are witnessing horrible atrocities playing out on the world stage, coming through directly on their phones. And the barrage of information and also misinformation is relentless. In an effort to make sense of that chaos, they'll look for answers, and some students will turn to their professors for guidance. So the way professors teach their students about history and contemporary events can obviously go a long way in shaping their worldview. But universities don't exist in information vacuums. Students are also bombarded with many so-called explanations from both from their classmates, but also from online. And particularly vulnerable students may latch on to the answers that they hear or read that reduce these really complex problems in the world into those simple solutions with a clear villain and a clear hero.
Yeah, that really clear villain, clear hero makes sense to me. It just sounds like a sort of perfect storm of oversimplified thinking. I want to be clear that we understand the impact of the phenomenon we're describing, not just talking in the abstract. According to a recent survey conducted by the ADL, 73% of Jewish college students in the United States reported either experiencing or witnessing anti-Semitic incidents in their fall 2023 semester. That is a huge number and upsetting to me as the mom of a Jewish college student myself. Let's look at a recent incident that took place at an American university in the Midwest to see how age-old accusations of Jewish power are being repackaged today.
What happened on
You took everything! You have took everything and you come here during our only moment, ma'am. You own America! You own everything!
Everyone knows that Israel owns America.
Let's be clear, ma'am. 27 states out of America are not allowed to speak about Israel. To speak on Jews. Why? You tell me why.
Let me say one thing. Israel owns the music industry. Israel owns the
What? That is such an anti-Semitic trope. Now we're getting really anti-Semitic.
I mean, these accusations, the anger behind them, and how ludicrous they are, they're divorced from reality. It's really hard to watch. And I hear directly from friends who both are professors and who are students that it's really hard to be Jewish on college campuses right now in that environment. A viewer named Chuck is asking if there are any trends on college campuses that are especially disturbing. I'd like us to broaden that question a little, Vidya, if we could, because of course, whenever anti-Semitism increases, other forms of hatred are also more visible and more vocalized. Tell us more about other groups of people who are being targeted.
Well, after Hamas attacked Israel and after the war began in October, Moonshot saw a dramatic increase in online threats of violence of over 400% against both Jews and Muslims. And some reports indicate that hate against Muslims and Arabs is at or beyond the levels that were seen right after 9/11 and after the Muslim ban that was threatened back in 2017. So just as with anti-Semitism, this kind of hate is underpinned by pervasive misinformation, by black and white thinking, for example, a belief that Muslims are all terrorists or that Islam is a religion of hate. Muslim and Arab students say they're experiencing more hate than they've ever experienced in the past. And this hatred and fear, it impacts many communities, not just those who are Muslim, but anyone perceived to be Muslim, including Arabs that belong to other faith groups and Sikhs who may be targeted.
Those are really terrifying statistics. And so much of what you're describing is either directed at or produced by young adults and teens. As a historian, it can't help but make me think about how this is not new as a tactic, that it was used years earlier by the Nazi Party. For example, I think about in May 1933, just a few months after Hitler became chancellor, students in university towns across Germany joined Nazi leaders to burn over 25,000 books in an effort to supposedly purify Germany and its culture. And these spectacles, they were very public, and they vividly demonstrated the regime's intolerance of ideas that challenged or defied Nazi ideology, and they were also designed to intimidate Jews. White supremacists today also recognize that there's a utility, that it's very useful to prey on college students to advance their goals. And we recently spoke with a lawyer named Karen Dunn, who won a landmark legal case against far-right extremists based on a rally that they had staged in Charlottesville, Virginia in August 2017. In preparing for trial, Karen and her colleagues learned how these hate groups operated. Let's listen to Karen explain why they deliberately chose the University of Virginia as the site for one of their demonstrations.
One goal of the white supremacist movement that I think people are not aware of is an all-white ethno-state in North America. The way to catalyze a race war is with battles. One of the reasons that college campuses were targeted by the white supremacist groups were that they were places that you could reliably get left-leaning counter-protesters to come out in opposition to the white supremacist groups, which would create an environment that was susceptible to violence and create an environment where the white supremacist groups could attempt to claim, oh, this was just in self-defense because there were these people who were there who were in opposition to us. And we had to do what we did. We had to punch people. We had to run through them with our shields and our bodies and our flagpoles because we were just defending ourselves. And so college campuses became really a target area for these white supremacists to create violent events.
So this was really carefully provoked, almost staged. They went there looking for a fight. More recently, violence in the Middle East has been spurring turmoil on college campuses, though I know that's on the minds of a lot of people watching. And across the US, far-left activists are becoming the loudest voices, spewing anti-Semitic rhetoric. Vidya, could you help us understand the sort of strange alignment that may be surprising to people, how far-right groups are taking advantage of this moment of turmoil to further their own agenda?
Far-right extremist groups are embracing the current unrest to spread anti-Semitism so that it becomes more and more mainstream. A couple of months ago, we saw a group of neo-Nazis march in Madison, Wisconsin, and at the University of Wisconsin, brandishing black and white swastika flags. They were chanting, "There will be blood," and saluting Adolf Hitler. Some neo-Nazis are even showing up at pro-Palestinian protests to provoke violence. And far-right groups would love to see a racial war break out between minorities. They want to see minorities, in this case, Jews and Arabs, wipe each other out so that the only ones left standing are white people and they can form a white nation.
So if I'm following what you're saying, they just want to amp up chaos of any kind, especially between minority groups?
That's right.
Another element is that people who hate one group of people often hate other groups too. It's not usually limited. What is the dynamic at play here, and who suffers as a result?
Well, hate almost never stops with just one community. As threats against Jewish and Muslim communities surged in October of 2023, they rose for other groups as well. I remember on October 9th, we saw violent rhetoric online against women rise almost 50% in relation to the conflict. And opposing extremists also unite in their hatred towards specific communities. I'm talking here about extremists that come from different perspectives, different sides of the extremist spectrum. For example, anti-Semitism and anti-LGBTQ plus hate unites neo-Nazis and Islamist extremists alike. They reinforce one another in their mutual hatred of both of these groups. Extremists often feel threatened by many communities, and that might include Black, Muslim, Asian American, LGBTQ plus communities, and immigrants. Many groups and individuals may feel the brunt of this hate as a result.
We have a question video from a viewer named Liz asking, are there any student groups that are actively opposing this hatred? Have you and your colleagues at Moonshot come across any organized efforts, or is it more piecemeal?
There are so many efforts ongoing across the US to counter hate, to bring communities together across divides, to foster conversations. I'm very happy to share. If anyone would like to reach out with me, I'm happy to share examples of organizations that are doing some good work in this space. But I want to make sure we don't feel hopeless that there's nothing positive ongoing. And I know we're going to talk about solutions in a moment.
Let's actually turn to that now, because there is so much anxiety. It is very easy to feel hopeless and just exhausted by it all. However, I've been talking to you for probably like a year and a half now, and you have taught me that seemingly innocuous interactions can sometimes have a bigger impact than we might realize. Let's turn to some cause for hope. Could you please tell us about how an unexpected act of kindness helped to change the course of one neo-Nazi's life?
Sure. I'm going to tell you a story about Arno Michels, who has become a dear friend of mine over the years. Arno was a neo-Nazi skinhead by the time he was 17 years old back in the 1980s. He was actually the founding member of a worldwide racist skinhead organization. He was also the frontman of a hate metal band. His songs included lyrics that promoted white power, demonized Jews, advocated for a racial holy war. Today, Arno couldn't be further from that. He is a peace advocate who has built a career now around leading people away from violent extremist ideologies. He supports families of neo-Nazis in this process to get people out. And back in October 2019, Arno wrote an open letter that explained an interaction many years ago, which ultimately helped him to reject the extremist movement he founded and the hateful beliefs that he promoted. He had been going into this McDonald's every week, and he had been greeted by this friendly African-American woman who worked at the cash register. Every time he entered, she would greet him with a smile. He would walk in really angry and covered in swastika tattoos, and he would always be greeted by kindness and a warm smile on her face. On his last visit to that McDonald's, Arno actually became self-conscious about his appearance. And he had a new swastika tattoo on his ring finger, and he didn't want her to see it. He didn't want her to see it when he was paying for his food, so he tried to hide it, but she saw it. And she could have reacted to it in a number of ways. He wrote specifically about the courage and the compassion that she exhibited when she saw the tattoo. Instead of reacting with fear, she looked him straight in the eye and she said, "I know you. You're a better person than that. I know that's not who you are." She didn't get into an argument with him on his beliefs. She just stared right into his core and told him that she believed in him and that he was better than that. Arno actually broke into tears at that moment and ran out of that McDonald's. And he credits that first act of kindness as really the seed that took root and spread and ultimately pushed him to turn his life around completely. And I think that story really illustrates the power of each interaction that we have with those around us, even the small interactions. We have the power to change lives.
It's really incredible. I can't help but wonder if that empathetic and, as you said, courageous woman ever saw that letter or recognized herself in it, or wondered what happened to Arno, why he never came back. But her act is a shining example of the power that ordinary people can have to influence others, especially one-on-one on a human level. Vidya, we are getting so many questions, people asking for guidance on what we can do in this moment. Viewer named Harold writes, "Be careful who you listen to and follow." And questions from a man named Doug asking, "How does one combat this type of hate?" And Cindy asking, "How can we in our everyday lives stop this?" What would you suggest?
Well, the most important thing that we have to avoid is to become desensitized, right? This hate is becoming so mainstreamed. We're seeing it online at volumes that we've never seen before. It takes a lot to shock me as someone who's worked on these problems for about 15 years, but I've been shocked at just how commonplace and mainstream so much hate is today. So it's so important that we don't become desensitized, that we push back against extremist beliefs, and that we also remember the human impact that these hateful narratives have. And everyone can play a role here, Edna. If you see, for example, if you see extremist content online, you can report it to get it taken down on many platforms. If someone's inciting violence online or offline, it has to be stopped. That's not okay. There is a kind of line that needs to be drawn there when we think about free speech. If someone's inciting violence, especially online, that has to be taken down. You can also block or stop following people who are spewing hate or who are celebrating or glorifying violence, and that will have an impact if it happens at scale. And if it's safe to speak up in a situation where someone is spouting hate, then it's obviously really important to do so. I say that recognizing that sometimes it isn't safe. Sometimes it doesn't feel safe to speak up in a situation like that. And you absolutely shouldn't speak up if you're physically unsafe to do so. But even in situations like that, there still might be things that you can do. There might be silent action that you can take. For example, you can leave the room when someone's acting in that way. You can kind of physically pull yourself out of the situation. That might also have the effect of creating an opportunity for someone else to follow your lead if they hadn't thought that that was something that they could do. You could even just reach out and offer support to someone who you know might have been affected or harmed or might be feeling emotions as a result of experiencing that hate. And for those of you who might have a loved one or someone who's close to you who's sharing a conspiracy theory, maybe they're not on the pathway to radicalization, but they're just sharing some content that you know might have a harmful impact. You can challenge them. You can have conversations with them. You have to remember that for the immediate individuals, the individuals who are in your immediate circle around you, your loved ones, you are the most powerful person that can have an impact on them. It may not be easy. It may take time, but you have the power there to create change. And finally here, we have to grant people the possibility to change. I know it might be hard to imagine, but we've just heard the stories of Derek, of Lauren, of Arno. These are people who have completely turned their lives around and left hate behind. They are not alone. There are there are thousands of people across the globe who have completely turned their lives around and left hate behind. So I think we all need to keep that optimism in mind. We have to keep that hope and remember that change can happen, even for people that are deeply embedded in this worldview. And also remember that we can be a part of that change through our little interactions, the day-to-day interactions, and also the bigger support that we provide to our loved ones who might be going down this path.
I find all of that really encouraging in a moment that can feel quite bleak, and I hope it also does for our viewers. I want to thank you, Vidya. You've helped us understand many of the dynamics at play and also why young people in particular are susceptible to extremist ideas, both what about them, but also that they are being targeted directly. Thank you, Vidya.
Thank you so much, Edna.
It's also encouraging to learn about strategies that all of us can employ to ensure that anti-Semitism and other forms of hatred do not become normalized, do not become something that just goes by unchallenged. All of us do have the power to act in big ways, and small ways together add up. We can make a meaningful difference, and we hope that today's program gave you some inspiration. So we thank you for joining us, and be safe and well wherever you are.